Begin today the Gemara on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis. We're in the middle of the Amud where it says Tanya Kivasei de Rabbi Yochanan. The first word in the line is the Chayshinan. So we're in the middle of a sugya here. There was a Mishnah on Daf Yud Beis where it spoke about a person that finds a shtar chayv, a document of a loan. Do you return it to the lender? Do you not? So the Mishnah there brought a machlokes of Rab Meir and the Chachamim. Rab Meir says it depends if it's written in it achrayis nechasim. If it's written in it the ability to be able to collect from the properties that were sold off. In such a case, you can't return it. But if there's no achrayis nechasim that's written in the shtar, then you could return it. Chachamim disagree. Chachamim say you can never return it. So in the Gemara before, there was a few different opinions of how to explain the Mishnah. We had over here, the last point we learned was Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Lazar says that the machlokes is in a case where the borrower says, that he doesn't admit. He says, I never borrowed this money, or he says he paid it up already. So the borrower doesn't admit to this whole thing. In such a case, Rab Meir says that there's a distinction if it's written in it achrayis nechasim or not. And the reason is because if there's achrayis nechasim, the shtar is kosher. If there's no achrayis nechasim, then the shtar is not kosher. And the Rabbanan say, no, either way, even if there's no achrayis nechasim, so the way Rabbi Lazar interpreted this is that you can collect from nechasim b'nei chayrin, but you can't collect from nechasim m'shubadim. That's one point Rabbi Lazar said. But so again, the point there is, according to Rabbi Lazar, the whole discussion of the Mishnah is in the case where the loive is not admitting to this whole thing. He says, I never borrowed this money. In a case though, where the loive says, yeah, I admit, I borrowed this money and so on, and when the loive admits in such a case, there's no issue. You can return the shtar right away. Why? Because Rabbi Lazar says we're not concerned for any collusion. We're not concerned for pirayin and kanunya that maybe the loive and the malva are colluding together to collect now from a buyer and then split it between them. That's Rabbi Lazar's opinion. Rabbi Yochanan though disagrees. Rabbi Yochanan says no. The whole machlokes between Rab Meir and the Rabbanon is regarding this point of chayshina lepirayin. About this whole point of here that we're concerned about maybe even if the loiva comes and admits that he owes the money and he didn't pay it, don't return it. Because if it's a shtar sheyesh b'achrayis nechasim, then you can collect with it from a buyer, and they're maybe making this trick over here together to be able to collect from that person. And he explained that according to the Rabbanan, even in a case where there's no achrayis nechasim written in it, but it's a mistake. It's a mistake of the scribe. He omitted it, but they have the power to collect from the buyer. So therefore, even if they're admitting, the loiva is agreeing, yeah, give it back, no problem, we're still concerned. We don't give it back. That was the point we learned before. Here the Gemara is going to bring a braisa, which says, like Rabbi Yochanan, and is a question on Rabbi Lazar, and also Shmuel. Shmuel said before basically the same shot as Rabbi Lazar. Okay, so let's see inside. Zok the Gemara, we're in the middle of Yud Gimel Amud Beis. Tanya Kavasei de Rabbi Yochanan. We learned in a braisa that says, like Rabbi Yochanan, Etuyufta de Rabbi Lazar b'chada, and this refutes Rabbi Lazar's opinion on one point, and Etuyufta de Shmuel b'tarti, and it will refute what Shmuel said in 2 points, as the Gemara will explain. So what does the braisa say? Matzah shtari chayv, a person finds a loan of a document, v'yesh be'em achrayis nechasim, and it's written in it clearly that you can collect also from the properties even after they're sold off. So here the Braisa clearly says, even if they both, the loiv and the malva, both agree that yes, this shtar is valid, I didn't pay it yet. Don't give back this shtar, not to the loiv, not to the malva. So what do we see here? The Braisa is clearly saying, why shouldn't you give it back if they both agree? The reason is because we're afraid for a kanunya. We're afraid that they're going to use this document to collect a second time from a buyer of a property and then split it between themselves. Okay, so this is one point where you see clearly here that it's arguing what Rabbi Lazar said, that we're not concerned of this. If this property does not have written in it achrayis nechasim, so then bisman shahaloiva moide, if the loiva is admitting that he owes this money, yachzil malva, you can give it back to the malva and he'll collect with it. Ein loiva moide, but if the loiva does not admit, then lo yachzil lo lezeh, you can't give it back. If the loiva disagrees and he says, I never borrowed this money, we're concerned that the reason why the malva lost it is because it was already paid, and therefore you don't give it back. This is Rab Meir's opinion. So the Gemara now explains, Shahaya Rab Meir, because Rab Meir would say as follows, Shtar chayv, shtar chayv sheyesh be'em achrayis nechasim. When you have a shtar chayv, if there's a achrayis nechasim that's written into it, gaive min nechasim mishubadim. You can collect with it even from properties that were sold off. If there's no achrayis nechasim that's written into this document, then goyim nechasim b'nei chayrin. You can collect with it from nechasim b'nei chayrin. That's Rav Meir's opinion. Okay, which is another point, as we'll see, the Gemara is going to point out, this is another point which is not like what Rabbi Elazar said before. Rabbi Elazar said before, a document that there's no achrayis nechasim written in it, the whole document is puzzle. You can't use it for anything. Now, the Brisa continues and says, Chachamim say, Echad zeh ve'echad zeh, any shtar chayiv, regardless if achrayis nechasim is written in it or not, goyim nechasim mishabadim. It's an omission of the sefer. Describe, if he didn't write it in it, he omitted, but either way, you can collect with it from a buyer. And therefore, what are the Chacham saying? You can never return this shtar to the lender, even if the loiva admits that he owes the money, because we're afraid for a pirayin and a kanunya. We're afraid that they're colluding to go and collect money again here. That's the brisa. So the Gemara says, Tiyufta de Rabbi Elazar b'chada. This refutes what Rabbi Elazar says in one point. And the Gemara here is not going to go on to show how this refutes Rabbi Elazar. Just an interesting thing. The Rishonim point out that the whole next piece of the Gemara from here until a few lines down into Yudalet Amar Aleph is not part of the Gemara. It's an addition of Rabbi Yehuda Goin that added in over here to explain this whole Tiyufta. It's not characteristic for the Gemara to go through this kind of discussion, but it's an addition from the Goinim. And here the Gemara is going to point out what is the refutation of Rabbi Elazar's opinion in one point. And the interesting thing is, the Gemara is going to point out right away that there's really 2 points that were refuting Rabbi Elazar's opinion. What are the 2 points? Let's see. The Alma, what did Rabbi Elazar say? Li Rab Meir, according to Rab Meir, shtar shem b'achrayis nechasim, a shtar that it's not written in it achrayis nechasim, ein goyim nechasim mishubadim, v'loy nechasim neichayrin. Rabbi Elazar said that according to Rab Meir, such a shtar is worthless. You can't use it for anything. And therefore Rab Meir says it's no problem to return it to the lender. V'ka'amar, that's one point he said. Now, a second point Rabbi Elazar said is, v'ka'amar ben l'Rab Meir, ben l'Rabbanan, lo chashinu l'knonya. That in a case where the loiva admits to this loan, there's no issue, return it. We're not afraid that they're going to make a trick, that they're colluding to go and collect money a second time. Now, Braisa Ketani, but in the Braisa it says, on both of these points, not like Rabbi Elazar. Shtar she'en b'achrayis nechasim. First of all, it said that regarding a shtar that there's no achrayis nechasim written into it, mishabdi hu delei gavi. The Braisa says, so you can't collect now from mishubadim, which are properties that were sold away. But the Braisa clearly says, but if it's b'nei chayrin, migbe gavi, you could collect from it. That's one point that's not like Rabbi Elazar. And also, v'ketani, the Braisa clearly says, bein l'Rab Meir, bein l'Rabban, according to both opinions, chashina l'knonya. We are concerned for this knonya, for this collusion that they're going to collect money a second time. The Ketani, the Braisa finishes off, according to the Chacham's opinion, even if both the Leiva and the Malva admit that the Leiva admits, I borrowed the money, I didn't pay back. We don't give back the shtar. Why not? We see that we're concerned for a knonya between them. So these are the two questions here really on Rabbi Elazar's opinion. So the Gemara right away asks on this, so you're now just refuted Rabbi Elazar's opinion on 2 points. Why did we say that we're refuting Rabbi Elazar's opinion just on 1 point? So the Gemara says, Chaduhu. We consider this to be 1 point. Why? The Chad Tamhu. When Rabbi Elazar said what he said, it all comes from 1 point. The Mishum, the Kama Rabbi Elazar Mechalekes B'She'en Chayiv Maideh. Because Rabbi Elazar said that the Machlekes of the Chachamim and Rab Meir in the Mishnah, where Rab Meir said, do you return a lost document, a shtar chayiv? Rab Meir says, it depends if it has achrayis nechasim written into it or if it doesn't. Chacham said it makes no difference. So the way Rabbi Elazar explained that machlekes was, b'she'en chayiv maideh, they're arguing in a case where the loive is not admitting to this loan. So why is he saying that it's machlekes in that case? The machlekes is based on the fact, a shtar that has no achrayis nechasim, is it worth for anything or not? Rab Meir says it's worth nothing. Once there's no achrayis nechasim written into it, it's not worth anything, so you give it back. He anyways can't collect with it. Chachamim say no, even such a shtar, you could collect with it from at least from the chasim b'nei chayrin. And the leiv is screaming and saying, I don't owe the money anymore, so you don't give it back. That's the explanation for the machlekes. So once he explains it that way, again, he's explaining the mission this way, so then what comes out from this? Automatically, what comes out from this is that you understand that in a case where the loiva is maideh, then everybody agrees. There's no problem to give back the shtar. So the fact that Rabbi Elazar holds that we're not choishish for a knunya between them is a result of the fact that he's explaining the Mishnah that it must be that the leiva is not maida. And then there's a problem to give back the shtar because the leiva is not maida. But if the leiva is maida, then there's no issue, because then we're not concerned of a knunya. So it really all comes out of the pshat that he learns in the Mishnah. So therefore, even though it is two different points, but because it's all based on the pshat that he said in the Mishnah, so therefore the Gemara considers it to be 1 point. Okay, that's regarding Rabbi Elazar. Now the Gemara says to Yuftu the Shmuel betarti. This Braisa refutes Shmuel's opinion also on 2 points. Chada ke Rabbi Elazar. 1 point is because Shmuel earlier on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph said similar to Rabbi Elazar. The Hamaykim Masnisim B'Shein Chayv Maida. As the Gemara said before on Daf Yud Gimel, Shmuel also explains the Mishnah when it's a case of Ein Chayv Maida. In this Braisa, it clearly says no. They're arguing in a case where the loiva is Maida, and the argument is when should we be concerned about a knunya? That's 1 point where it refutes what Shmuel said. And v'chade, another point, which is also similar to what Rabbi Elazar said, but even more than what Rabbi Elazar said. Da'ama Shmuel. Shmuel said a separate statement, a separate point as follows. Matzah shtar hakna b'shuk. When you find a document of a loan in the street, and here he spells out clearly, it's talking about a shtar hakna. This is similar to a point that we learned before on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, where it says this is a document of a loan, but it's written into it clearly a kinyan that on the date that the shtar is written, that's from when you're obligated to pay, even before you borrowed the money. That's the concept of hakna, that you're makne, that I'm going to pay even before I borrow the money. So you find such a kind of document in the street, yachzil bailam. You can give it back to the lender, to the owner of the shtar. V'loi chashina leperon. We're not concerned that it was paid up already. And Shmuel said this even in a case where the loiva is standing there and screaming, "No, I paid it up already." You still give it back to him. We're not concerned for any knunya in a case where he's admitting. We're not concerned that it was actually paid in a case where the loiva himself is screaming that it was paid. You give it back. So to Yuftis over here, what Shmuel says is refuted from what it says in this Braisa, because what does it say in the Braisa? The Braisa here says, even in a case where the loiva agrees to the malva that I didn't pay it up yet, you can't give it back. What I see is I'm concerned that it did get paid up, and even when the loiva says I did not pay yet, we're still concerned that it got paid, and they were concerned that there's a knunya. Definitely in a case where Shmuel is speaking about, in the case where the loiva is screaming that I paid up already, the loiva is not agreeing. The chashina lepiron, for sure we're afraid that he's right, that we should be concerned that it was actually paid already. So therefore, this Braisa refutes what Shmuel says, that a lost shtar akna, you can give it back. Okay. Now the Gemara brings another statement that Shmuel said connected to the opinion of the Chacham in the Mishnah. Again, what the Chacham is saying in the Mishnah, you find a shtar chayv, you can't give it back. It doesn't make a difference if there's a achrayis nechasim in it, written in it or not. You don't give it back. So Shmuel says, my time of the Rabbanon, what's the basis of Chacham's opinion? Savri, it's because the Chachamim hold, Achrayis ta seiferhu. The fact that it's not written in the shtar, that the Achrayis that you can collect from the properties that were sold off, it's an omission of the scribe. Even without it explicitly being written in the shtar, you can still collect from those properties. So therefore, such a shtar, you can't give back after it was lost, because then he's going to use it, he's going to collect with it what he's not supposed to. Emma says, according to Shmuel, it's not so, what the Gemara here says here is not so pasha. Taisus points out, according to Shmuel, the case he explained, the case of the Mishnah is when the loiva is standing and screaming that I paid up this loan already. So in order to explain why Chachamim say that you don't return the shtar, it's enough to say because the shtar can still be used to collect from the properties in the possession of the loiva, even without this point of achrayis ta'as seifa that you can collect from buyers. It's not necessarily l'chayra for Shmuel to say this, but nevertheless, Taisus says Shmuel Misvara said this idea: any shtar that is written in it, that just alone without the achrayis, it's a ta'as seifa. There's a svara, and the Gemara will soon explain what the svara is. There's a svara that a shtar, when a person lends money and it's with a document, he only lent the money on condition that he'll be able to collect from the properties of the loiva, even if the properties are not in his possession anymore, even after he sold it off. That's Shmuel's opinion. Can we say that Shmuel said this rule? But Shmuel clearly said the opposite. He said as follows regarding a document. Shvach. When you're coming to collect and you want to collect the shvach, in other words, you're not only coming to collect the property itself that is owed to you, you also want to collect from the improvement that there is in this property. And if a person bought a property and then this property is going to be confiscated from him. So there's the shvach of this property that is being confiscated from him. Or in the shafar. Shafar means now when you're getting reimbursed, what are you going to get reimbursed with? Are you going to get reimbursed with a regular quality property, which is what's called beinanis or ziburis? Or are you going to be reimbursed with the best idis, shafar, the best properties? And also shibud. The fact that when you're getting reimbursed, you can go and collect from the one that owes you money for your property that was not confiscated, that there's a shibud, meaning that you can collect even from a buyer, not just from the person himself that has that property in his possession. All of these details, again, shvach, shibud, these three details that you write into a document, that you should have the rights for this, tzarich limalech. You have to consult with the one that you're writing the shtar with before you write these details into it. It's not an automatic understood thing. If you're not going to consult with him, you're not going to write it clearly in the shtar, so then you don't have that possibility. So we see clearly over here, shibud, when it comes to this power that you have, a property that was confiscated from you, to be able to go then and collect from mishubadim, or if you're owed money, that is. So this l'chayda should apply the same b'negea to a lender, that is. A lender that wants to have the possibility to collect from mishubadim, so only if you consult with the borrower are you able to write shibud into the shtar. And if it's not written in the shtar, we could assume that he didn't agree to this. So how could we say that Shmuel said that if you don't see the shibud written into the shtar, it's a Torah sefer? So the Gemara says, Lema, should we say, Man da maha, the one that quoted what Shmuel said before, that Achrayis is Torah sefer. So there's two opinions of what Shmuel said. He doesn't agree with this other statement here that was said in the name of Shmuel, that you have to consult with the loiva, whether he's ready to be mishabed himself to the karkois, even after they're sold off. So the Gemara says, no, you don't have to say that. It's not a question, because we're talking about two different cases. When Shmuel said that even if it's not written clearly in the shtar, that you're obligating to pay the mishubadim even if your properties are sold off, there it's talking about a loan. Why by a loan do I say that it's an automatic thing even if you didn't consult with him? So here the Gemara says this svara. When a person lends money, he doesn't just throw his money and lend money without having a guarantee that he's going to be able to collect the monies from the loiva. And therefore, even without writing clearly that I have a lien on your properties and I can collect from your properties even if you sell it off, even if you don't write that clearly, it's self-understood. But here, where it says that you have to write it clearly into the shtar and you have to consult with him, here it's talking about a sale. But when a person is buying a property and he wants to be sure that the property that he's buying, that even if it'll get confiscated from him, that the seller is going to reimburse him. Over here, in such a case, if you're not going to clearly write into the property that you're going to be able to collect from the seller, even from mishubadim, so then you're not going to have that right. Why? Because when it comes to buying a property, the ovid inish, it is a possibility that a person goes, zavin ara, and he buys a field, liyaymeh, even just for one day. Person sometimes he buys the property and he takes a risk and he has the property, he pays for it, and even if he has it for a day, for a year, and then eventually one day it gets confiscated, it's possible that the person is ready to do such a thing, to take a risk to buy this property. So over here, not unless you write clearly into the shtar that you're going to be reimbursed from mishubadim, is that part of the understanding of the sale. And the Gemara brings a clear eye to this of a story that actually happened. Individual by the name of Avur Bar Hihi Zovin Alisa Machse. He bought a very, very expensive property from his sister. And then what happened? Asa Bal Chayiv Tarfa Minei. Then his sister owed money to someone, and that Bal Chayiv came and confiscated the property from him. So Asla Kamed Demar Shmuel. So now Avur Bar Hihi comes to Shmuel and says, "Let my sister reimburse me for this property that was confiscated from me." Amalei. So Shmuel says to him, Kosvalach Achrayis, did she write for you clearly into the document that he's taking responsibility, that she has to reimburse you for this? Amalei, loy, no, it wasn't written into the shtar of the sale. Amalei, so Shmuel said, Imkain Zila Shlama, if so, go in peace. In other words, she doesn't have to reimburse you for this because it wasn't written into the document of the sale. Amalei, so Avu Barhi knew the halacha, so he asked Shmuel, but you're the one that said it, even if it's not written clearly in the document that you're taking responsibility, you still have to take responsibility for this. Amalei, so Shmuel answered, here the distinction we said before. When it comes to a loan, over there, even if you don't write it clearly, it's self-understood, you take responsibility for this. When it comes to a sale, it's different. Over there, if you don't make it a clear condition, it's not written, it's possible a person buys a property for a day, and then the seller doesn't have to take responsibility to reimburse you for this. Okay, now the Gemara goes off, since it brought in this whole subject of a property that was sold and getting reimbursed, so the Gemara here goes off into this sugi for the next few blot. So the Gemara, Abaye said the following halacha: Reuven shemach asad l'Shimon. Reuven sold his property to Shimon, Bachrayas, and Reuven is taking responsibility that if this property will get confiscated from you, I'll reimburse you. And this is what happens. Now the Balchayv of Reuven comes along, the Katarov Lemine, he wants to confiscate the property from the buyer, from Shimon, for his loan. So Dino, who the halacha over here is, the Azul Reuven umishtar din ba'adei. Reuven goes to the Bezdin at the Din Torah, and he can go and argue with this Baal Chayv that wants to collect the property from Shimon. V'lei matzi amalei, and the Baal Chayv that's trying to collect the property from Shimon can't turn around to Reuven and say, La baldvarim b'diyat, you're not someone that has the right to come and taina with me in the Bezdin. I'm not taking a property away from you. I'm taking away the property from Shimon. The Amalei, because Reuven can just simply answer him, the mafkis minei, the moment you confiscate the property from Shimon, alai didi hader, he's going to come back to me to get reimbursed. So of course, it's very relevant to me. So therefore, I can come and argue in Bezdin against what you're trying to do here. Tosfos over here explains that why is it necessary for Reuven to come and argue in Bezdin? The rule usually is that whatever Reuven can say, even if Shimon doesn't have all that information, doesn't have all that knowledge, Bezdin will taina for Shimon whatever Reuven could have tained. So anyways, Bezdin will taina this. So Tosfos has a bunch of pshat in one. Tosfos says, but nevertheless, Reuven is smarter and he's able to be misaded. The taina is better. And there's other things. The Tosfos says that Reuven can twist the hands of this Baal Chayv much better than Shimon himself could. And therefore, Reuven has the right to come to Bezdin and taina with him. Some say that this goes even further. Even if Reuven sold the property to Shimon, and he's not taking any responsibility for this. So if the property gets confiscated from Shimon, Reuven has no loss from this. But still, Reuven can come and argue in the Bezdin against this Balchayv. Why? Because Reuven could say, I don't want Shimon to have any tightness against me, any hard feelings against me. I sold him a property and now got confiscated from him. So that's enough of a reason why he's an involved party here, that he can come and argue against this Balchayv. Abai also said, Reuven sold the property to Shimon, and he did not take responsibility for whatever happens now with this property. And after he sells the property, so now there's a challenge to the ownership of the property. There's a whole argument over here if this Reuven that sold it was the right owner or not. So now the buyer says to himself, oy vey, what did I get myself into? He wants to back out from the entire sale. Could he back out? So the Gemara says, before he made a chazakeh, so he can retract from the whole sale. According to Rashi, the pshat over here is he made no kinyan yet. He didn't pay money, and he didn't make any kinyan yet. So if he didn't make a chazakeh, so he can retract from this kinyan. But once he made a chazakeh, so now he acquired it already, now it's too late. He can't back out from the kinyan. The seller tells him, listen, a bag full of knots. In other words, this property that's worthless, you thought about this and you accepted it, you bought it, and you knew I'm not taking responsibility for this. Probably was a cheaper price for that reason, and you bought it, and that's it, and too late. Says the Gemara, I have a chazakeh. What's the chazakeh was saying? That after this chazakeh, you can't retract from the sale. When he walks on the borders of the property and he fixes the gate, and so this is the chazak of the property that he can't have charata from. This is Rashi's pshat in the Gemara. Tosfos though disagrees. Tosfos says that the fact that after the sale you can't retract is obvious. The Gemara doesn't have to say that. Tosfos says the chiddush of this Gemara is even in a case where there was a kinyan. Didn't pay money yet, but there was a kinyan chalipin. He made a kinyan on the property, but nevertheless, the Gemara here is saying that a person, even after he makes that kinyan chalipin, does not rely on the sale until he actually goes and does this chazakah that it says here, that he fixes something in the property. Up until that point, it's sort of an unspoken agreement that he has that time period to back out from the sale until this chazakah. That's how Tosfos learns it. Now, Vekedamri, some that said regarding what it says here that it goes even further. Afila b'achrayis nami. Even in a case where the seller took responsibility that he's going to reimburse the buyer if the property gets confiscated from him, even in such a case, he's able to back out before it makes a chazakah. Why? Why should he be able to back out? He's going to get reimbursed anyways. Because the amalei, because it doesn't matter. The seller tells him, when the property gets confiscated from you, show me this document of a tirfa. Show me this document that someone confiscated the property from you, and then I'll reimburse you. Up until that point, you can't back out from the sale. Itmer, we learned another halacha about the property that was sold and then was found to not be the owner, in the ownership of the seller. Machlekes about this. A person sells a property to his friend, and it turns out that it's not his property. He stole it. He sold him the Brooklyn Bridge. He sold him a property that never belonged to him. Rav Amar, so now you have to get reimbursed for this, obviously. The Gazlan, the seller, which is the Gazlan, has to reimburse you. So Rav says, Yeshle Mois, he has to give you back your money. And also, Yeshle Shvach. There's different things that you may have invested in the property. Rashi says he could have fertilized the property, he put up a nice fence around the property. All of that, he has to come and reimburse you for this. Okay, now, who's the one that has to say? Here Rashi points out actually an interesting thing. Who's the one that has to reimburse the buyer? The meicher is the one that has to reimburse him. Not who's the one that takes back this property? The original owner, the nigzal, is the one that takes back the property. But it's the meicher that's the one that has to reimburse him. L'chayre, the meicher could say, "Why should I be the one that should reimburse you for the shvach? The shvach is not something that I stole. But nevertheless, Rashi says over here, the case is that when the meicher sold the property, that shvach was already there in the property when he sold it. Elamai, later on, that shvach was deteriorated. It wasn't there. And the buyer brought it back to its original condition. So therefore, in this case, is where Rav is saying that the meicher, the gazlan, is the one that's going to have to reimburse him. Otherwise, it's the shvach he's going to have to collect from the original owner, from the nigzal. Okay, that's a detail Rashi explains here. Okay, but the point of here is, Rav says that the buyer gets reimbursed both for the money that he paid for this property and also for the shvach that he invested in the property. Shmuel says no. Mois yeshle. For what he paid for this property, that he gets reimbursed. Shvach ein lei. However, whatever he improved the property, that he doesn't get reimbursed for. So the Gemara now will explain what's the basis of Shmuel's opinion. The Gemara has an ibay about this. So the shaila was asked from Rav Huna. Pirish lo yisashvach. What's if the seller clearly spelled out that I will reimburse you if it gets confiscated from you, not only your money, but also you'll get back your shvach as well. I'll give you back the value of what you improved. What's going to be the halacha there? In such a case, will Shmuel agree that he will have to reimburse him for the shvach? Do I say, time of the Shmuel, the reason why Shmuel says that he doesn't reimburse him for the shvach, mishum delay pirish, shvacha, because he didn't spell out clearly that that's part of the deal, that he has to give back the shvach. But vahacha pirishle. But over here, he spelled out clearly that I'm going to reimburse you your money and also whatever you improve the property, so therefore he has to give it back. Or the Gemara says, maybe there's a whole other reason for what Shmuel said. Taimei the Shmuel, the reason of Shmuel's opinion is, Kivin the Lesle Karka. Since this Karka doesn't even belong to this seller, he is a Gazlan, Mechsi Kiribis. This is going to look like Ribis. Why does it look like Ribis? Because basically what's happening over here is, the money that you paid for this property wasn't really a payment for no property because it was a stolen property. So it's like this person borrowed the money from you. He took money from you, and now he has to give back money that he was holding of yours. So if he's going to give you back money plus shvach, it's going to look like he's giving back money that he borrowed from you, plus additional money for the shvach. So it looks like he's paying you back for a loan with interest. Even though obviously it's not actual ribis, but because it looks like ribis, so Shmuel said in such a case you can't pay back the shvach. That was the shayla that was asked from Rav Huna. Basically, what's the basis of Shmuel's opinion? Amalei. So Rav Huna said first he said yes, that even in this case that you can't pay back the shvach. Then he said v'lav. Then he said no, maybe not. V'rafya biyode. It wasn't clear. He didn't have a clear answer what Shmuel meant to say. But then the Gemara brings Itme Rav Nachman Shmuel. Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel very clearly, Mois Yeshloi, when you're getting reimbursed from a Gazlan that sold you a property, so you get reimbursed the money that you paid for it, but Shvach Ein Loi. But then whatever additional things you improve the property, that we don't pay you back. And that's even in a case where you said, you made up clearly that you're going to get paid back this shvach as well. My time, what's the reason? The reason is because it looks like ribis. Kivin the karka ein loy. Because the karka over here, that the seller, he sold you this karka wasn't his bichlal. So schar ma'asav oimid v'noitel. It looks like that you're getting back your money that you gave him. It's like almost like a loan. You gave him money and he held your money for a while. Now he's giving you back the money, and you're getting schar ma'asav. The fact that you gave him this money for a while, he's giving you back also additional schar, additional pay, which is like ribis. So therefore you can't get paid back for this shvach. That's the halacha that Shmuel said. So now the Gemara is going to ask on Shmuel's opinion. So Rav asks Rav Nachman from a Mishnah in Gittin where it says, la'achilas peiris. Okay, so here what this Mishnah is speaking about is when a person had different obligations of payment, and he comes to collect the payment. So here, in all these cases that this Mishnah is going to say, you could only collect your payment from properties that the person that owes it to you has in his possession, but not from properties that he already sold off. And what are those cases? If you're coming to collect what's owed to you because of paytis that were confiscated from you. And the Gemara is soon going to explain what these paytis are. Or l'shvach karkois, if you improve the property that was confiscated from you, and now you're coming to collect for that. So this is another case where you can't collect from mishubadim. You can't collect from the person that owes it to you from properties that he already sold off. Or lemazin or ishava abanais. The mazain, which is the food that a husband, this is written in the ksubah, that a husband obligates himself that his wife will get fed. If he passes away, his wife gets fed until she gets paid a ksubah. Or the daughters get fed from the properties of the husband, or the father rather, until when they get married to someone. So all these kinds of payments, you can't collect it from properties of the person that owes it, from the father, the husband, or whoever it is that owes it. You don't collect it from properties that were sold off already. Mipnei tikkun olam, and this is a tikkun olam. Rashi explains the tikkun olam is regarding the case of mazin ishim va'abana. Is the tikkun olam is that this is something which is there's no kitzvah. There's no set amount exactly of what you owe for this. If you would say that any time a person passes away and now he has a wife and children, they can come now and confiscate even from the buyers of this person that passed away, nobody's ever going to want to buy a property from anyone. Because the person you buy the property from one day when he passes away, now his wife and daughters are going to come to you to collect their mezainis. So how could you ever buy a property from someone? So this is the kind of thing that Chacham were misakin that you don't collect from mishubadim, from buyers. And similarly, b'negei tachilas peiris and shvach karkois, this is something which is unclear, which is unknown exactly. So therefore, a buyer can't be careful about this. Okay, but here the Gemara is going to explain now better over here. What are we talking about over here when it says the peiris and the shvach karkois of a property that you're trying to collect for it? Okay, so the Gemara here says, what do we see over here? That it's saying that in these cases you can't collect from mishubadim, from properties that were sold off. But that means, but properties though that are in the possession of the person that you're coming to collect from, that you could collect from him. Now what's one of the cases that it says in the Mishnah here? L'shvach karkois, that you're coming to collect from this the property that was now confiscated from you, and not only the property was confiscated, not only you want to be reimbursed for the money that you paid for it, but you also want to be reimbursed for the improvement of the property. So the Gemara says, my love, don't you think this is the case that Rav and Shmuel spoke about before? But lekeach megazlan, this Bryce is speaking about a person that bought a property, and it turns out that he brought the property from a gazlan, and now he wants to get reimbursed the money that he paid for it, and also the shvach, what he improved the property. And what does it say here? That he could collect that improvement. He can't collect it from Mishubadim because of Tikkun Olam, but he could collect from Bnei Chayrin. So this is a question of Shmuel. Shmuel says you can't pay that because it looks like ribis. So the Gemara says, Loi, we're not talking about a case of a gazlan. By a gazlan, it looks like ribis. Rather, b'bal chayv. We're talking over here about a case of a bal chayv. By a bal chayv, over there, even Shmuel would agree that a bal chayv has the ability to come and collect by a case of Bal Chayv. What does it mean, a Bal Chayv? When a Bal Chayv came and confiscated the property from a buyer. That's what happened over here. Baal Chayv came to a buyer and confiscated his property. So over here, when this buyer wants to come and get reimbursed, over here, Shmuel will agree that this buyer can demand his money back. He also could demand what he improved for the property back. Over here, it doesn't look like ribbis at all. In the case of a gazlan, it looks like ribbis. Why does it look like ribbis by case of a gazlan? A person sells you a property and it wasn't even his property at all. So he basically took your money for some time period and then he's taking it back. He knows it's not even his property at all. He's taking money from you and you get back your money. It's like a loan. So over there, if he pays you back extra, it looks like ribbis. But in a case where you buy a property and it was the seller's property, it was his, but now Baal Chayv came and confiscated it. So over here, the sale was a real sale. It's not like a loan. It was a real sale. Elamai, now I got confiscated from another individual that's coming to collect it. So over here, in such a case, Shmuel agrees that you get reimbursed even for the shvach that you improved in the property as well. That's the case of this Mishnah here. Says the Gemara, if this Mishnah is talking about such a case where the buyer, his property got confiscated from a Baal Chayv, so what was the first case of this Mishnah? The Mishnah in the first case talks about, how about if the peiris that grew in this property got now also confiscated from you? So, you cannot come and collect for those peiris from Mishubadim. That's what the first case the Mishnah said. But the question is, if you're going to say it's talking about over here, a Baal Chayv that came and confiscated this property from the buyer, Baal Chayv mi islay peri. A Baal Chayv doesn't even have the right to collect his loan from peiris in the first place. Because Shmuel said, Baal Chayv goyves hashvach. A Baal Chayv that's coming to confiscate a property, he could confiscate the property itself, which with whatever condition the property is in, whatever improvements the property has in it. But that's shvach in. He can confiscate the property with the shvach of the property. Avol peiris loy. But if there's fruits in the property that grew in the buyer's possession, those fruits the buyer keeps for himself. The Baal Chayv can't take it. So how can you say that this Bryce is talking about a Baal Chayv that's coming to confiscate a property from a buyer, but it says in this Mishnah also a case of peiris that are being confiscated. Peiris a Baal Chayv can't take. So ela pshita begoizel v'nigzal. So therefore, in the first case of this Mishnah, where it says that the peiris are being taken back, who's taking back the peiris? It's a case of exela. So therefore, the original owner, the nigzal, comes and says, the whole property is mine, including the peiris. So he's taking back the peiris. That's the case of the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, umidereisha begoizel v'nigzal. So if the first halacha of this Mishnah, when it speaks about peiris that are being taken back, it must be talking about a case of exela, and that's why the owner has the right to take back his peiris. So say Fanami is the next case of the Mishnah where it speaks about the shvach that's being collected as well, begoizel v'nigzal. And it's talking over there also about exela. So again, the question that we have in Shmuel comes back. We're talking about a case of exela, and it clearly says that you do have to pay for the shvach, not like Shmuel that says you don't pay for the shvach in such a case because it looks like ribbis. So the Gemara says, no, we don't have to compare these two cases. Midi area, do you have to compare these two cases? The Mishnah here lists a bunch of different cases. They're not necessarily the same. Ha kedeise, v'ha kedeise. Each case of the Mishnah is a different case. The first case of the Mishnah is a case of Gzela, and the second case of Shvach Karkais is talking about a loan. Okay, so we can resolve the Mishnah this way, and it's not a question on Shmuel. But the Gemara asks, but however, in a Braisa though, we learned, not this way. In a Braisa, we seemingly learned that the case of Shvach Karkois is talking about Exela. So it is a question on Shmuel. What does it say in a Braisa? The Shvach Karkois Ketzad, when the Mishnah here says that you're coming to collect the Shvach that you improved in this Karka, and now it's being confiscated from you. What's the case of this Mishnah? So the Braisa says, Harei Shegozal Sodem Mechaverei. A person steals a property from his friend. And now this property is being taken away from him. He's a gazlan. So the Bryce here says, when he comes to collect, to be reimbursed, the principal he collects even from the chasam mishubadim, and the shvach, the improvement of the property, he collects only from the chasam menechayrin. So the Gemara will right away clarify what the pshat in this Bryce is. When you read the simple words of the Bryce, it's talking about a gazlan. And it's saying a gazlan stole the property, and now it's being taken away from him by the original owner. And then the Brisa talks about the fact that this gazlan wants to be reimbursed. When you read the simple pshat of the Brisa, what does that mean? Why is the gazlan being reimbursed? He stole the property. So the Gemara explains, Hey Chidami, what's this Brisa saying? If you read the simple words of the Brisa, gazlan miman gavi. What does it mean that the gazlan is being reimbursed? Elalav, don't you think? What is this Braisa saying here? When the Braisa is explaining the Pshat in the Mishnah regarding the case of Shvach Karkois, what the Braisa is saying is, Kagon Shagozal Sadam Mechaveire. The Gazlan stole the property, and then Umachra La'acher. Now we sold it to someone, V'ishbicha, and the buyer improved the property, and now the property is being confiscated from the buyer, and the buyer wants to be reimbursed. And what is the Braisa saying? That the Pshat on the Mishnah is that this buyer gets reimbursed not only for the money that he paid for it, but he also gets reimbursed for the shvach. So this is a question of Shmuel that said that you don't get reimbursed for the improvement of the property. So the Gemara says you can't ask me a question from this Braisa. Amalei. Lav terutzika mitartzis. Don't you have to anyway switch the pshat of the brisa? The way the brisa is written doesn't make any sense. So therefore, tritz nami b'bal chayv. Instead of reading the brisa that is talking about a gazlan that's confiscating the property from the buyer, in a case of a gazlan where the owner is confiscating it, that is. So it's talking about a bal chayv, that there's a borrower that or a lender rather, a bal chayv that came and confiscated the property. And as we said before, that's not a question on Shmuel. In such a case, Shmuel agrees that you get reimbursed for the money and for the shvach as well. Okay, the Gemara will bring more eyes for Shmuel. We'll see him at Shem tomorrow. And Shmuel.